how would you assess the administration of the Buhari regime?
Very good question. It's rather hard to say you want to assess the administration of Buhari, especially when he's not been around in the last 2 years of the administration. And when I say he's not been around, not necessarily because he's not been physically present. Of course, he's been physically present at some point, but at the same time, he's been sick and no one knows what is wrong with him. No one knows where he is. So it's really hard to assess such an administration. But I think the more important thing to talk about or to think about is, why is Nigeria this way? How is it that there is a president who is absent and things seems to be in a state of stagnation? There is no movement forward and there is no movement backward. So we're just in a standstill. And that is because the office of the president has been personalized and privatized. Rather than seeing the office of the president as an institution of the state, it has become a personal property of different interests within the country. And this interest is constituted by people from different parts of the different ethnic groups in Nigeria. So we do not have an institution that you could say, okay, if the president is absent from office, then the vice president steps in and the institution of the state continues or governance continues. But what we see in the case of Nigeria is that anytime the head of state or the president is absent, everything comes to a standstill. So this is not the first time that this kind of a thing will be happening in Nigeria. So
are you suggesting a bill that limits the period that a person is an acting president?
Look, I think we should get something clear. The Constitution is clear about the role of the president as well as the role of the vice president. But it's one thing to have a constitution, and it's another thing to make the constitution work. But in the case of Nigeria, we have a constitution, but because of vested interest, the constitution is not allowed to work. So it is clear that if the president is absent, the vice president steps in. But what we see is that anytime the president is absent, the vice president is incapacitated in a way because of this vested interest that is always hankering for power at the center.
Currently in this country, there's the existence of what we call a not too young to run bill that seeks to promote that young people get into governance. Do you agree that Nigerian youths are ready for governance in Nigeria?
Nigerian youths have always been ready for governance. And I do not necessarily think a bill, if enacted, will change that. But what I see as the problem is the idea or the notion that we have a set of people that have been in power since 1960, and they keep recycling themselves. And when they keep recycling themselves, it becomes virtually impossible for the youth to occupy a space that they should ordinarily be occupying. And the other problem that I see there is that, well, there is no fighting organization that could take on the role of a vanguard that could advocate for good governance in the country. So it is not necessarily a problem of maybe because you have elders or old people ruling, that is why there is so much crisis in the country, economic and political, or because the youths have been shut out of governance, that is why there is a crisis. No, that is not the issue. I think the more important issue is that, one, we do not have political parties in Nigeria. Then two, even the political parties that we have now are like association of friends with no ideology that is backing any of the political parties. And that is why you see people move from one party to the other all the time. So PDP, APC, Labour Party and the rest of them are not completely different from each other. And that is because there is no ideology that you could say defines each of these political parties. For example, if there is an ideology that defines the PDP, it will be impossible for someone who believes in the ideology of the PDP to say they are going to leave the PDP and move to APC, because that will be a contradiction in itself. You don't want to see yourself moving to a party that you do not believe in. Yeah. But because the parties are virtually the same, they are association of friends, so it becomes easy for people to move around in their quest for power.
Lately, there's been a call for restructuring, and everyone seems to be talking about it. It seems to be the very latest word in Nigeria. What are your views about restructuring?
That's a very good question. Restructuring. Well, the interesting thing about the current clamor for restructuring in the country is that those who are clamoring for restructuring now were in power 2 years ago. They never thought about restructuring. And now that they are out of power, they are all clamoring for restructuring. You can say the same thing for the party in power. When APC was out of power, one of their campaign slogans was, oh, we need to restructure this country. We need to restructure the system. But by the time they got into power, no one talks about restructuring again. So the tragedy of the current debate about restructuring is that it has become a slogan for campaigning for political power, rather than for taking it seriously that we want to restructure the country. So that is what I see there. But that doesn't mean that the clamor for restructuring is not a legitimate question that we'll need to answer at some point. It is quite legitimate that people need to clamor for appropriate restructuring of this country. And restructuring could come in form of economic restructuring and political restructuring. So those are the two things that needs to be tackled. And what do I mean by economic restructuring? There is so much economic injustice in this country. So you have the rich who are getting richer and the poor who are getting poorer. And the poor have become a pawn that the rich plays around with all the time. So that is the kind of economic restructuring that needs to take place to guarantee economic justice for the people of Nigeria. And political restructuring also ties in with economic restructuring, because you cannot restructure the economic system without restructuring the political system, because it is the political system that will guarantee economic justice for the people. So that is the kind of restructuring that I see that can actually bring about good governance and transparency and accountability in Nigeria.
Speaking about economic restructuring, for years the Ogoni land and the Niger Delta in general has continued to face pollution of land and air and water. And just about last year, the federal government flagged off the cleanup process in Ogoni land. But it's over a year now and nothing has been done to that. What are your reactions to this?
You know, good question again. So that is the point I was driving at when I say economic justice or economic restructuring and political restructuring. Because if you look at it, if you look at the Niger Delta, so it's not only polluted, people are denied access to their land, they are denied access to their resources, they are denied access to their livelihood. And that is a great economic injustice to a people. And I've written extensively about this, and I've also spoken extensively about this at different fora around the world, that what you see happening in the Niger Delta is it's a microcosm of what is happening to the entire Nigerian people. But the Niger Delta represents just one aspect of that economic injustice. And the only way to tackle that problem will be to restructure the system in such a way that people who have lost their livelihood, people who do not have access to their land, can regain their land, regain access to their livelihood, and bring about economic justice for the people of the area.
Lately, there's been a new Biafran agitation in the country, and the leader, Nnamdi Kanu, has declared a boycott of the Anambra elections coming November 18. What are your reactions to this?
Well, let me start by saying that every group, every ethnic group should have the right to self-determination, the right to self-determine how they want to run their economic system, how they want to run their political system, and how they want to run their socio-economic and political system, whether it is the Igbos, the Hausas, the Fulanis, the Yorubas, the Ogonis, and the other ethnic groups in the country. But at the same time, while acknowledging that this is a legitimate demand because of the perceived marginalization of Igbo people, in economic and political anxiety, people usually revert back to their ethnic identity.
Okay.
And that is exactly what is going on now that I see with IPOB, that I see with the Niger Delta struggle, or the people clamoring for Arewa Republic and Oduduwa Republic and all sorts of republics. There is so much economic and political anxiety in Nigeria, so much economic and political uncertainty. And people are finding it extremely difficult to make ends meet. And when that happens, people revert back to ethnic identities. And when they revert back to ethnic identities, they begin to see someone who looks different from them as their problem. So if you are in Lagos and you believe that Lagos is a Yoruba state, you see every Igbo man there as the problem if they are doing better than you do. So, but that takes away, or that takes away the whole thing about the reason why there is economic and political problem in the country, because the Igbos are not the problem, the reason why there is economic and political problem in the country. The Yorubas are not. So it is because there is an elite, a political elite that has been dominating the political system for so long and have made things virtually impossible for everyone to thrive. Okay. So that is what brings about economic and political anxiety. And that is what creates a political and economic hatred among people, where people will begin to see those who are completely different or who looks different, who speaks differently from them as part of their problem. Whereas, just like I said earlier on, it's a problem of economic justice, it's a problem of political justice, and it's also a problem of not appreciating the history of this country. And why is that so? It is because if you look at the educational curriculum in this country, for example, history is not being taught. So if you ask an average Nigerian, can you tell us the history of the Nigerian Civil War or the Nigerian Biafra War? That is not being taught in school. And when history is not being taught, they say, when there is a people without history, if you don't know where you are coming from, you wouldn't know where you are going. So that is what I see as part of the problem. And like I said, it is a legitimate issue. It is a legitimate demand that people have the right to self-determination. But at the same time, the right to self-determination that I want to see happen in Nigeria is the right for the Nigerian people to economically determine how they want to be governed, and to politically determine how they want to be governed in a way that will secure economic and political justice for everyone.
But the boycott of the elections of Anambra State coming November, is that right in its sense? I
think that would be a grave mistake to say you want to boycott an election. If I were to be organizing as part of IPOB, what I'll do is I'll use that as a test case to claim political power in the East. So if you say you speak for the Igbos and there is an opportunity that an election is coming in Anambra State, why don't you test your political will through that process by saying that, okay, we want to show to the Nigerian state that we are actually organizing and we are actually popular in the eastern part of the country. And one way we are going to do this is to say we're going to capture Anambra State and use it as a lesson to other groups that when you are properly organized, you can actually win election. So rather than saying we want to boycott Anambra election, why don't IPOB say, okay, we are going to sponsor candidates and we are going to capture all electoral offices in Anambra State. And by the time we do that, we are going to show to the rest of Nigeria how our proposed Biafran state will function in a democratic state. And if they win the Anambra election, with all the federal allocations coming to Anambra, they could say, okay, this is a test case for democracy. We are not a violent group, so we are a group that is interested in democracy. But at the same time, we are marginalized. But now that we've taken over power in Anambra State, this is how we want to govern. This is how we want to use the resources of our state to show or to improve the lives and the condition of our people, of the people of Anambra State. And I can assure you, if that were to happen, if Anambra State becomes an epitome of a democratic system, other states will say, oh, okay, I think it's good to organize as a people. And we want to use this to organize my people, to organize in Edo State, to organize in Lagos State, to organize in other states. Use that platform to capture power. Because every agitation, it's all about power and how to use it.